Hello and welcome to Atheists Talk. My name is James Zimmerman, and today we're going to be discussing intersex and identity. And our guest today is Dr. Sharon Preves. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad you're happy to be here.
Thank you.
Here's an introduction about Sharon before we discuss so that you know that she's the person for the job here. Sharon is a professor and chair of sociology and co-director of public health sciences at Hamline University. Sharon teaches and conducts research on gender, medicine, sexuality, ethics, tourism, and identity. Her research on intersex has been published in several books, and she's co-authored publications on collaborative teaching and female genital cutting. Preeves' current research focuses on medical education, and she recently published a social psychology anthology through Oxford University Press entitled Classic and Contemporary Perspectives in Social Psychology. And currently, Sharon lives in St. Paul with, she put, her extraordinary spouse and several cats and a greyhound. Well, so welcome again.
Thank you.
So before we get into the meat of your book, and we're going to be discussing the book that you wrote, Intersex and Identity, the contested self, I wanted to define some terms just to make sure that anyone who's listening or watching will be on board with what we're saying here. So the first one obviously is intersex. It's right in the title of your book. Do you want to tell us how you define that in your book?
Sure. The term intersex is a synonym for hermaphrodite. And so what we're talking about is someone who has some features, anatomical features that aren't clearly female or male. And so it could be a newborn that is born with genitalia that are somewhat ambiguous. It's hard, and that's usually, of course, how we sex a child, by looking at the genitalia, particularly looking for a penis. Or it could be someone who is born externally looking very clearly female or male genitally, and then at puberty they go through some changes that are inconsistent with their sex assignment. And it could be someone who has chromosomes that are not typically associated with their sex, so a female-bodied individual who has XY chromosomes, or a male-bodied individual with XX chromosomes. There's also something called mosaic, where an individual can have a combination of chromosomes XX or XY varying in the body, or non-traditional chromosomes such as XXY or YYX. So there are a number of different conditions, several dozen. Yeah. And
can you throw out some percentages or numbers of
Sure.
newborns?
So a really conservative estimate is that 1 in 2,000 individuals is born with external genitalia that are ambiguous, that are not clearly female or male. It all depends on what you include in that definition. So if we were going to include something like a condition called hypospadias, which is when a male child is born with the urethral opening, so the opening for urination, not distinctly right at the tip of his penis, but somewhere along the shaft of the penis. That condition, again, is called hypospadias. That has been estimated as high as 1 out of 150 male births. So it really depends. The number that is cited most frequently, though, is that 1 out of 2,000.
Oh, okay.
And that number is consistent with the frequency data for both cystic fibrosis and Down syndrome.
Oh, okay, to compare it to things
yes,
people might
and
be
so
more.
most of us know someone who has Down syndrome or cystic fibrosis, and I would also argue that most of us know someone who is intersexed.
Okay, so while it's maybe fair to say it's rare, it's definitely not unheard of then.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say what makes it seem more rare than it actually is numerically is socially that we just have so much shame and stigma around any kind of sexual difference.
Okay, yeah. And let's just clear up that because there could be some confusion between the terms intersex / hermaphrodite with transgender. So can you differentiate those?
Yes. Typically someone who is transgender or transsexual has very clear female or male anatomy. So there's no anatomical confusion there, but their gender identity or their sense of self as a feminine or masculine person doesn't really mesh well with their physical anatomy as a female or male-bodied person. So that is someone who is likely to experience a lot of angst and discomfort. Those who would identify as transsexual with gender identity dysphoria. or gender dysphoria rather, who might actually seek a surgical or hormonal sex reassignment surgery, which is very different than what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about an anatomical difference, not necessarily related to any kind of gender identity.
Okay. And your book has a glossary that's helpful.
It does.
To
I hope so.
elucidate these terms. Speaking of your book, then let's talk about it without giving away so much that people don't buy it, because
Sure.
I know that's what an author wants.
Well, thank you.
So it's basically based around research that you did.
Yes.
And participants that you interviewed. So do you want to just tell me as much
Sure.
as you want to about the guts of the book, like how it
Absolutely.
came about?
Yeah, so I was actually a graduate student at the University of California, San Francisco, studying medical sociology in a seminar on medicine and gender. And we read an article by biologist Anne Fausto Sterling called The Five Sexes, Why Male and Female Aren't Enough. And I was really interested in this issue. And she talked a lot about hermaphrodites in mythology and in history and in artwork. And I was taking a class at that time on medicine and the family, and we, as good graduate students, needed to write an obligatory term paper on some topic. And so I thought, well, I'll examine how parents are involved in sex assignment decisions for their newborns who aren't clearly female or male. And I started searching the sociological literature, the social work literature, the psychological literature, nursing literature. Finally, and there was just nothing about this. Finally, and this was in 1993, and finally, so 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Finally, which is amazing to me that I've been working on this long. Finally, when I got into the medical literature, it's when I hit the proverbial jackpot, so to speak, where I found article after article after article talking about medical issues with regard to otherwise healthy children who had been surgically and hormonally sort of fixed as female or male, sort of these corrections. And I was really quite stunned by that at that time. So that's initially how I became interested. At the same time, a woman by the name of, at this time she was going by Cheryl Chase, now she goes by Beau Laurent. She was the founder of the Intersex Society of North America, and now she is working with Accord Alliance, another organization she formed. She saw this article by Dr. Fausto Sterling as well and wrote a letter to the editor saying, this isn't just about hermaphrodites in history and in art or mythology. A number of us are intersex today, and if you want to speak with us or join us, if you are intersex yourself, please send correspondence to Cheryl Chase, Intersex, creator and founder of the Intersex Society of North America, P.O. Box, San Francisco, and there was no organization at that time. That's how the organization was formed,
so she
by
pretended
this
there
letter
was
to the
one
editor.
to get people to,
and it turned into this tremendous social movement just at the time I started becoming interested in the topic. And so what I was able to do was contact a variety of support groups and advocacy organizations who were working for either social support or who were interested in changing some of the medical intervention with regard to these surgeries. And then I ended up interviewing 41 individuals who were born intersexed. They ranged in age from 20 to 65. It's been a little while since I looked at the specific data.
So young adults to people
Yes,
on the verge
absolutely.
of senior citizenship.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I traveled throughout North America, the United States and Canada, doing this research, would go on the road for about a month at a time and talk with people face to face, typically about 2.5 hours in these interviews, and but really talked with quite a variety of people, some who really clearly identified as intersexed people, that was sort of an identity for them, others who were very clearly distancing themselves from any kind of an identity that had a marginalized sexual or gender component to it. So at the conclusion of this, I ended up with 2,100 single-spaced pages of interview and field note data that I analyzed, which is what the book is based on.
You did some editing.
Yeah,
Or
I
someone
did.
did some editing somewhere.
Yeah, I did quite a bit of editing. Yes.
2,100 pages, you said?
Single spaced.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I haven't read too many 2,100 page
Yes.
books.
Yes, and I haven't written one either.
So we've kind of touched on this now, especially when you
Yes.
said that some people choose not to be identified and something that's been marginalized. But I wanted to talk about the perception of intersex individuals, and I wrote in our society, but I think that's too limiting. Maybe we can just say in
Sure.
societies in
Yes.
general, because I know you touch on societies that are not North America. Maybe you can
Sure.
talk about some of those.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
So we have in much of the we're in a very global world, but in much of industrial society, and particularly Western industrial society, we have this notion of binary sex, that there are two and only two sexes, and that expectation is so strong that unless that is identified right at birth, it's almost as though socialization or personhood can't even take place. So, and we can look at any of our institutions, religious, legal, educational, etc. We use sex as a marker to really help create social control and order and all kinds of things. And so in our in these countries, in these societies, when there is a difference, when we can't clearly say this person is female or male, it's almost as though everything goes on hold. And so parents, and these are some of the stories I've heard, and of course I've been keeping current with changes that have transpired in medicine as a result directly of this activism that has come out of the intersex social movement. But the typical way to deal with this was as a social emergency. Could I read something from the book?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this was the American, I'm on page 151. This was published in July of 2000. The American Academy of Pediatrics first published position statement on this issue. And they say here, the birth of a child with ambiguous genitalia constitutes a social emergency. Abnormal appearance can be corrected and the child raised as a boy or a girl as appropriate. Parents should be encouraged not to name the child or register the birth if possible until the sex of rearing is established. Infants raised as girls will usually require clitoral reduction, which with current techniques will result not only in a normal-looking vulva, but preservation of a functional clitoris. These children's diagnosis and prompt treatment require urgent medical attention. And so this really, I think, summarizes quite well the urgency with which fixing this problem has been framed. And that it is a medical issue is quite interesting as well, because this is the vast majority of children who have ambiguous genitalia when they're born are not in any kind of physiological danger. So we really are talking about a social emergency, which is how they refer to that here. So in comparing that with other societies, a few come to mind. So there's the Guevadoche, in the Dominican Republic, which, and I realize I haven't checked, can I say these words? I'm so used to speaking very frankly about these issues, because I think that's important to use accurate terminology. So, and I don't speak Spanish, but it's huevodoche. So it's huevos, like eggs, you think about huevos rancheros. Huevodoche, doce at 12. Eggs at 12. What this refers to is a child who goes through a just naturally occurring sex change, if you will, at puberty. A child who's born female looking, who then has testicles that descend at puberty. And so what we call that, and that both in the Dominican Republic and in Papua New Guinea, there's this room for this child to go through, or these children to go through this kind of a transition without saying, oh, we can't have that happen. What we call this 5-alpha reductase deficiency in the United States and in other parts of Western industrial societies. And what we do when this is discovered at birth is we actually castrate the child with the abdominal testicles so that they won't go through that kind of a sex change, because it's seen as too disruptive to have something as fundamental as sex actually shift. And it's a genetic, that type of intersex is a genetic condition that runs in families. And so when you see that it might be that a family has 3 daughters, 2 sons, and 2 huevadoche. And so it's just very, very commonly accepted. So there's a place for it, and we don't really have a place for that difference. Going back to that frequency data, 1 out of 2,000 or 1 out of 150, however we're going to count this, there is enough frequency to say, oh, we do have a place for this because it's occurring. But socially, it's as though we need to get in there and fix the child as either female or male, and the argument has been to prevent stigma, to preclude them from experiencing trauma because they are different with regard to physical anatomy.
Yeah, regarding parents in the United States, you said many find it difficult to prepare for or even imagine a child's life without first knowing its sex. And then on the very next page you said, some parents are so concerned that people might mistake their baby for the wrong sex that they tape pink bows to their bald heads, have their ears pierced in infancy, or dress them in gender-specific primary or pastel-colored clothing. So there's really a strong drive to, even if your child is not intersex, to just make sure that they're pigeonholed into one of 2 genders. Right?
Absolutely. I would try, think about getting a newborn gift for someone, going to a baby shower. So it's pink, it's blue, or it's yellow. Right?
Right, yeah.
We don't know. And how much pressure there is for parents to decorate the nursery in a certain way, or to put a pink or a blue blanket on a newborn. People even get up in arms about their pets being gendered. If someone refers to your cat or dog by the wrong sex, people want to correct that. No. Yeah. As though it would be a major insult, and that it's important to that social interaction with the pet to understand that it's a female or a male cat or dog.
Yeah, from personal experience with our second child, my wife and I didn't find out the gender prior to her birth, and several family members and friends, well-meaning, would say, we don't know what to buy.
Right.
Him, her, it, wouldn't even know what to call the fetus at that point.
Yes.
I don't think that speaks to some flaw on their part. I think that it truly was difficult to go into, say, Target and find something that wasn't gender specific. So they're like, if I know that this is a boy, I can buy a jumper. But since I don't know, my choices are blue and pink.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's going on here in terms of the desire to intervene, being benevolent. It's something about helping families. I don't think that the outcome is truly helping families in terms of this medical intervention for the most part. However, the desire is to say, well, let's help them fit in so that they can shop with ease, and they can, when the kindergarten teacher lines them up into, girls and boys get in these lines, that they'll do that. We would never line our children up by, browns and whites line up like this, but we still do that very much with regard to sex and gender.
And then let's see. Oh, we were going to talk about how is it treated by religions, especially the dominant religions in our society. I think that might be appealing to many of the viewers of this show.
Yeah, well, there isn't really much room for this in contemporary religion because our religions are so very binary with regard to gender. So there are, depending on the kind of religion we're talking about, oftentimes not only female and male roles with regard to clergy or parishioners, members of a congregation, but also things, rules that happen at home as well with regard to religion in terms of what kind of prayers to say. Can you touch the book, of holiness? Can you lead a congregation? So it's really, what kinds of rites of passage do you go through? One of the people I interviewed identified as neuter. That was the way this person felt most comfortable talking about their gender, and had actually gotten their driver's license in a couple of different states to show an N rather than an F or an M. on the driver's license, and this individual was raised Jewish and was originally sexed female, but wanted to go through a bar mitzvah as a young adult, as a 13-year-old, and but didn't identify as transgender. Just had a body that was going through these, had features that weren't typically female, and really had struggled with not only the family but also with the congregation in terms of that really being disruptive. There is another person I interviewed. There's an organization, an intersex support organization that uses religion to critique the desire to fix or correct what nature or God creates. And so it's interesting how that has come up as well. But for the most part, I've heard people really struggle in terms of where to fit in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your book mentioned it briefly. You gave us example, because I'm thinking about this with gay marriage being
Sure.
legalized in certain states, and now
Absolutely.
even on the national stage. I think your example that you gave was in Texas,
Yes.
where the law, and a lot of this is religiously motivated, the law said, a male can only marry a female. And then what
Right.
happens with intersex or transgendered individuals? Do you recall the specifics?
Absolutely,
Okay, share them with
absolutely.
us.
Sure. Well, so we've had all of these constitutional marriage amendments that have passed in the majority of United States, and Minnesota, of course, this fall was the first not to have that be on the ballot and to fail.
Yeah.
But these, whether it's a Defensive Marriage Act at the state or federal level, or it is a constitutional marriage amendment, the language is about one man marrying one woman. And what the law has failed to do is to define what is a man or what is a woman. And so there have been these cases, both in Texas and in Kansas, where widows, one in a wrongful death suit, medical negligence, and the other in a contested estate, widows came forward and were dismissed in court because they happened to be transsexual women. So they were born biologically male and had transitioned and were living as women, and on behalf of their deceased husbands, they were making these claims. And both of these cases were thrown out of court saying, you don't even have a valid claim because you're not really a woman. And those cases in Kansas and Texas were appealed up through the state Supreme Courts, and both Kansas and Texas then defined how are we going to articulate what is female and what is male. And they said, let's do it by chromosomes. So someone with XX chromosomes is female, and someone with XY chromosomes is male. And this is not what this law was intended for whatsoever, but a lesbian-identified couple was able to get legally married in the state of Texas because one of them has XY chromosomes, one of them is male to female, transsexual, and the other is natal female, biological female. And so, this lesbian couple is sort of, showing how ridiculous that is in terms of what kind of a corner we're boxing ourselves into if we try to define what is male and what is female. And of course, some people don't even have clearly XX or XY chromosomes, as I mentioned a few minutes ago.
So lesbians being legally married in Texas, that might be the
Yes.
most mind-blowing moment of your book, I think. So.
Yeah, pretty unexpected.
Yeah, I had to put the book down and be like, well, I got to digest that. And then we were going to mention real briefly, we have about 5 minutes left
Sure.
here, about why the medical community feels the need to intervene. Because you mentioned in one sentence, you spoke of how what used to be a sin then evolved into a
Yes.
crime, and now it's a medical condition.
Yes.
Do you want to
Great
talk
point.
about the evolution
Sure.
from sin to medicalization?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if we think about social deviance, what we're talking about, there's these three basic elements of social deviance. First, that there's a social norm that is agreed upon. There are two sexes. Then there's a violation of this norm. There's, a child is ambiguous, you can't really tell what sex it is. And then the social response is the most interesting, insightful element of this social deviance in terms of, do people say, oh, who cares? Or are there surgeries and other things going on? The social response tells us not only how important that norm is, but it serves to reinforce a norm and to decrease the violation of that norm. It also tells us a lot socially about what institutions are imbued with power at a given historical moment. And if we look back, 400 years ago or so, when we were founding New England and these different colonies, it was really religion.
Yeah, sure.
That was, and so something that was deviant was a sin, and you would have a religious kind of a consequence to that. That shifted then to a legal or a governmental kind of response, that something that was deviant becomes classified as a crime. And so you have then a legal kind of punishment for that. And then more recently, imbuing the institution of medicine, which is relatively young. The American Medical Association wasn't founded until the mid-1800s, for example. There wasn't any kind of organization of doctors. And so now what was once sin and what was once crime is considered a sickness. And so when there's any kind of difference, if we think about that norm, violation, and social response, if there's any kind of difference, it's the institution that's imbued with the power that's going to be doing the responding. And of course, we have this medicalization of childbirth that has occurred, with roughly 98% of childbirths occurring in hospitals in North America. Okay. And so any kind of difference that appears, whether it is one that has medical consequences or not, is responded to within that framework.
Yeah, that's amazing if you just track the progress through the
Yeah.
centuries. But it shows the decline in the power of religion, which I was happy
Absolutely.
about. But I don't like the idea of everything being medicalized, such as something
Right.
normal, such as being born intersex, or even
Right.
just giving birth. These are,
Right.
I suppose intervention is required sometimes, and many lives have been saved. But it's gotten carried away, for lack of
Yes.
better terms.
Yep.
We're pretty much out of time
Sure.
for this half, but we're going to continue this discussion with Sharon in part 2, and we're going to talk about her book some more and some more of the things that she found in her study. So watch that show too. And in the meantime, I want to thank you for watching this show. If you would like to contact us at the information you see on the screen, the phone number or the website, we will send you a copy of our newsletter, and we'll tell you how you can be put in touch with Minnesota Atheists. If there's topics that you'd like to see on this show, let us know, because we'd be happy to discuss them on this show. If you're interested in us, we're interested in you. Thanks for watching.